Hey, everybody, you're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Bryan Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Tom Kelly. Woo!
Hey, he's doing it himself.
Hey, when you're a comic book creator, when you're a creator, you do it all yourself, Billy.
Yeah. Anyways, you may have heard and seen, we do have Tom Kelly with us for the first time. We've all known Tom for a long time, but this is the first time he's on the show, and he's going to be talking about the Kickstarter campaign that he has for his... Oh my God! I forgot the order of the Frankenstein foot thing.
It's
Foot Fist Frankenstein.
It's funny because you can remember Fing Fang Foom like it's tattooed
Easily,
on the back of your brain, and that is not any harder. So.
Okay, brother, so instead of the three of us giving the pitch for the graphic novel itself, you're here, so why don't you give us the elevator pitch, Reader's Digest version of what the graphic novel is all about?
Okay, so Foot Fist Frankenstein, I screw it up a lot too, folks, so don't be worried. Foot Fist Frankenstein is basically a combination of all the things I loved as a kid fused into one. Monster movies, Jack Kirby comic books, and Kung Fu theater. It's a revenge story. It's like a martial arts revenge story. So the main character is Frankenstein. He's the Frankenstein monster. My premise is after Mary Shelley's book, he's walking the earth, and he's walking in Tibet, and he finds like a Shaolin-style monastery. There he finds like sanctuary and peace and happiness. And ultimately, a warlord shows up and shatters that dream. Then that leads him on a path to get like revenge on the warlord for wronging him and taking away the peace he's actually achieved. So in many ways, it's very much like a John Wick meets the Incredible Hulk a la Kung Fu theater. Or if you're older, like all we are, it's what if the Incredible Hulk could fight like Bruce Lee?
Mm-hmm.
That's the story. That's the elevator pitch story.
Okay, so you had mentioned Jack Kirby comics. One of our stock questions that we have for people when they first come on the show is, we basically like Lover Boy and start from the start. We want to know how you first got into comics.
Well, for me, it starts. My origin story starts when I'm very, very young. When I was like in preschool, I was a slow reader. Like preschool and first grade, I was a very slow reader. I didn't like to read, and I was actually behind on a reading level all the other kids my age. My parents, being very good parents, were motivated, and they tried everything to get me to read. I had an older brother. He's 9 years older than me. It's my older brother, Ed. He read comic books. He would buy comics at like the drugstore up the hill. And I would steal those because I thought the art was super cool. Like, Neil Adams Batman and the X-Men, the Jack Kirby X-Men and stuff. My parents noticed this and they saw that I was interested in that. And then they were like, all right, well, we'll buy Tom comics. He likes this. This is how we'll get him to read. So my first comic books were the Harvey comics. They were Hot Stuff, the Little Devil, Richie Rich, Casper, Wendy, like all that stuff, like Archie and his pals. So like that was my first entree because like that's what my parents felt was the safest to buy young Tom. But I was still stealing my older brother's comics, which was like, Neil Adams Batman or, the Byrne Claremont, like X-Men and stuff like that, trying to figure out like, Mom, what is this word? And she's like, well, that's adamantium. That's what that means, And I was like, well, what does it mean? And like, she was like, well, this is a word that means really strong and, all that stuff. And I was like, well, who's this guy? Like, what's his name? Like, I couldn't even read the characters' descriptions. And I was like, who is this guy? And she's like, well, his name is Wolverine. And I was like, well, what's that? And she's like, well, it's a type of animal. It's a type of little like bear type creature. So I was hooked immediately by the art. And then as I started to read, not only my Harvey books, but then my brother's other like Fantastic Four and Ditko's Spider-Man and all that stuff, that my like literacy level went from like basic crap to like way high, like jacked up. Like by the time I took the SATs, I literally aced the verbal like part of the SATs. My math scores, no, they were not so hot, but my verbal was like through the roof. I was reading I mean, when you read comics, you develop a literary level. And if you do it consistently, it's like building a muscle in the gym. You just get stronger and stronger. Like by the time I was in like sixth grade, I was actually reading all my older brothers like Conan books and John Carter of Mars books, like his Ray Bradbury books, and like all those things because he'd have them on his shelf. And I was born in 72. I'm like 48 years old. So there was no internet. There was 3 channels in PBS. So like TV went off at midnight. So in a Friday or Saturday night when I'm still up, I would just like grab one of my brother's paperback books and be like, well, let's read this Conan story. And so I would do that. And that's sort of what kept propelling me, on my journey. And even with my book, Foot Fist Frankenstein, like I said, like it's the things I loved as a kid. Well, back in the day, like Saturday matinees were either Hammer horror movies, Universal monster movies, or Kung Fu theater. Like that's what you got. Like, so if it rained out and I couldn't play with my friends outside, those were the movies I was watching. So I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan. I'm a huge Run Shaw movies fan, like 36 Chambers and Flying Guillotine and all that, as well as like American Ninja. Like, I mean, you look at like Frank Miller's work, it's all the 80s because ninjas were awesome, so
Yeah.
That's like sort of my initial origin and introduction that like propelled me to keep exploring in comics as I got like older and older and older, to do stuff.
All right, cool. Well, in the past, I've had a tendency to bogart the interviews, so we've instituted a method so I don't get to do that. So I am taking the interview baton, handing it over to Steve. Steve, what do you got for Tom there?
Well, first I have to say your mom must have had an insane level of patience when you have a kid who's coming up saying like, who's this comic book character? And I'm sure your mom didn't care about or know from comic book characters, but like the patience that she had to like go through and be able to like look at the stuff and make sure that you knew what was going on. That's classic. I know my parents, when I was reading comics, they didn't give a shit. They were like, as long as there's no boobs in it, I'm fine. And I'm like, well, I'm not looking for the boobs anyway. So, but
my mom, first of all, I love my mom. In my mind, she was a saint and never ever had sex. It was all magical. That's how I was born,
Of course.
Because I can't think of that. I literally can't think of that. It's like a white blank in my mind. But my mom actually was a huge patron of the arts. She loved New York theater. Like when my mom and dad met, my dad was a doctor and he worked in New York and he was an intern. He was working there. My mom worked in the same hospital. She was a dietitian. And they met and started dating in New York. They were both from the silent generation. Like my older brother and sister are 9 and 10 years older than me. So my parents are like significantly older than a lot of people's parents were. So my mom loved New York. She loved the theater. She loved the art. Like whenever she would like we lived in northeastern Pennsylvania, like right around Scranton. Like that's where we grew up. And so Christmas time or like Thanksgiving or Easter time, my mom would be like, we're going to see a Broadway show. Like that's what we're going to do. And so the whole family would go and then we'd eat at some like New York restaurant after the show.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started getting older, my mom loved like the Guggenheim Museum and the Met. Like she was a patron of all those places. So like she'd take me and like we got along really great because I loved looking at all the cool paintings and sculpture. And like we'd sit there and we'd look at like Andy Warhol soup cans and we debate like, is that art and why? And I mean, she was really great. She was really an advocate of art in my life. So she was very supportive. Obviously, the content, I mean, this was like seduction of the innocent era, right? So my parents were very, very concerned about, like, is this going to warp my brain? My dad's sister worked for the New York school system. She worked for the library system. And she's like, you know, she told my dad, she's like, Ed, whatever gets him to read, that's more important. And I assure you, this content is not going to screw this kid up, right? So, you know, my parents, like my dad, he was always interesting because he was a scientist. He was very medical guy, very medically minded, incredibly smart. But in the art world, like things like avant-garde art, performance art, like, you know, new wave art, like all that sort of experimental stuff, he really couldn't wrap his brain around. Mm-hmm. But he knew I was good. Like, he knew I had an interest, and he was like, okay, like, you guys are looking at me right now. Like, you see this drawing board right here? My parents bought that drawing board for me in 6th grade. I mean, so, you know, their thought process was like, we're going to support our son. And you know, the thing too was like, that doesn't mean they gave me the incentive to slack off. I still had to do the best possible I could in classes. Like I said, like my verbal and reading and literature and English classes, like I started really killing those classes. I started pulling A's in those. But like math and chemistry and stuff, I was like a solid C student. And like report card day was like, my dad would look at the report card, he'd see my grades, and he'd be like, good job, Tom. You're doing your best. Like, good. And I'd walk out of the room. My younger brother, a year younger than me, my brother Frank, who is, by the way, he has a PhD in material sciences now. He is a full-on scientist. He would get a B, and my dad would read him the riot act about how he's not, like, applying himself. So my dad scaled it by like what you were doing. You know? So my parents were very supportive, but they kept it on par. Like, okay. So another little aside to my origin story. I have 3 other siblings. I have 2 older and 1 who's a year younger than me. My older brother is a surgeon in Boston. My older sister is an attorney in Pennsylvania. My younger brother has a PhD in physics, and he teaches physics at a collegiate level. I have a master's degree in sequential art from the Savannah College of Art and Design. I have the lowest degree out of all my brothers and sisters, and I have a master's degree. My parents valued education and they prized it, but they also did scale it by like, you know, what are you good at and what are you not good at? And like if I pulled a B in an art class, my dad would have taken me outside and beat me with a hammer for an hour. Like that's how that was going.
Wow. No, but that having that kind of support structure is awesome, especially when you're going into sort of an more artistic field or have more artistic, interest. Especially when your parents might not be kind of in that field, or your family or even your friends might not get that particular aspect, to kind of still push it to you.
Just tolerance, like just the understanding of like, this is what you're into. Mm-hmm. I mean, my dad really liked the fact too that I also was a jock. Like I love to draw art. So like my favorite thing was to be like in a corner quietly drawing. But I also would read things like Wolverine or Captain America or Batman, and I would see like the level of training they would do. Mm-hmm. And it's like young athlete Tom Kelly. I just believe that's what you had to do. And then one of my idols is Bruce Lee, and you look at like his workout schedule, and he's like a fucking god.
Oh yeah.
So you're like, oh yeah, do 1,000 push-ups and run 4 miles, and then beat up John Saxon.
Which, that's a Tuesday. That's Lee's Tuesday routine.
Then Wednesday you spar with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
And that guy with like the really weird shoulder hair that's like Thursday, maybe Friday. Alternate.
Yeah, and then you invite Jim Kelly over and you talk about Shaft for an hour. It's great.
Yeah, it works out. Well, actually, kind of going along with that, you mentioned something about being a big fan of the Saturday matinee. If it was raining, if you were stuck inside, that was kind of, my childhood as well, growing up in southeastern PA. Before we moved when I was 8, 9 years old, there wasn't much to do. I mean, it's out in the country at that point. Now you can't even recognize it. It's all, suburbs as far as you can see.
Well,
but
as a kid,
then,
when I grew up in my parents' neighborhood, it was like 4 houses, and then behind our backyard was the woods.
Yep.
Like it's rural, it's rural PA.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like deer bedded down. Like I would come in when I was in college at like 2, 3 a.m. and I would just see the raccoons at the trash cans, like just causing havoc. And I was just so drunk and so tired. I was like, I hate you guys so much. I'm going to have to clean this in the morning. I just don't have the energy to like shoo you away. And they would sit there eating trash, just looking at me going like, what? Like what? Like, I'm like, you win. I mean, the best I could ever say was like, there was a morning where I came in at 5 a.m. and my dad was leaving to go out to work at 5 a.m. to the hospital. And it was like that old, like Warner Brothers cartoon where it's the sheepdog and like the coyote or Wild and Coyote. Like morning Bill, and they just like clock in like on different shifts. And my dad was literally like, "Good night." I was like, "Yeah," and that was, it's like, well, I was like 22. Like, what's he gonna do? Like, he knows I'm safe, so it's like, okay.
But hey, that crazy country aside, and just like being out in the middle of nowhere or coming home with like wildlife, the Saturday matinee is like the best. Yeah. It was like the best thing when you didn't have any channels on TV other than like the 3 or 4 that you got from the city. That was what you watched. No more cartoons, after like 11:30, there's no cartoons. It
was live action. It was all live action.
Exactly. You got live action. You got like whatever weird news show that comes on. But then you got the Saturday matinee. And the Saturday matinee, for me, was always the coolest. Like where we had Channel 17. Channel 17, which became Fox eventually.
Yep, I remember.
We had the Saturday matinees, and they would have bad 50s sci-fi or horror. Yep. And then occasionally they would have something recent from like maybe the late 70s, early mid 80s would show up where you're like, this must have been like straight to video, but not even straight to video, went straight to like just standard broadcast TV, like just weird shit.
You'd watch like Ice Pirates. Like,
yes.
That's really what happened.
Ice Pirates. But of course, like everything edited out because it's for TV broadcast. So you have like half the time they're just like quiet because they're like, and you.
Yeah.
The one thing that I never got until college was the Kung Fu and all of that stuff. So, but I got more into the wuxia stuff, like the weapons, the crazy, you have a sword that makes you fly. You've got shuriken that can like go through people or balls, like playing with balls.
Real talk, right? Like when I was a kid, you could order this thing, like mail order, right? You could order ninja weapons mail order. through this magazine, this catalog called the Dolan Sports Catalog. Right? My brother and I, my younger brother, we got these when we were like 10. We ordered nunchucks, ninja stars. I still have here. I'll show you right now.
Oh no!
I still have this. Looks like they're off the wall.
Oh
I have
no!
A wooden sword. This is a wooden Chinese sword, right? That I ordered, and I beat the living crap out of with my brother. Like, just I pummeled him, like mercilessly, right?
Oh, and stuff of course you can't get now
like,
if you're a kid.
Like, you had those matinees. You had Bruce Lee, and you had all these awesome Run Shaw movies like Flying Guillotine, 36 Chambers, and Wolf Warrior, and Return to 36 Chambers, and like Jackie Chan when he's like 12 doing stuff.
Oh, jeez. I was a big like early Stephen Chow. Kung Fu Hustle introduced Stephen Chow to the rest of the world, but like before that, you had Butterfly and Sword. You had it was the something about the doc. Like there was like 50 films.
I'm sure both of these guys, like Billy and Bryan, remembered like the Legend of Kung Fu, like with David Carradine.
Oh,
That was
I have a little more clear recollection of Kolchak.
right.
Kolchak, the
Friday
Night
night
Stalker.
shows, yeah. But for me, like the main kung fu stuff were the Bruce Lee imitators,
Oh, right.
like
Yeah.
Bruce Lee, and at least in
All
at least
those
in the
guys
New
who
York market,
looked like
they
Bruce, right.
they didn't really air the any kind of counterpart of kung fu theater until really like the mid '80s, and by that time I wasn't.
Oh
that
yeah,
mode,
no,
yeah.
for sure,
Yeah.
and but I mean, in the '80s, you get things like Jim Cotta and American Ninja and like Lee Van Cleef and The Master. Like that was a TV show, like you get all these weird. I mean, because I mean, look, you look at Frank Miller when he did Daredevil with the hand. That's that's after Bruce Lee. Like when you look at Shang-Chi, that is just Bruce Lee in Marvel Comics.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I've always maintained that we did have 3 real life superheroes in the 70s in Muhammad Ali, Evel Knievel, and Bruce Lee.
Oh yeah.
And there was a Marvel counterpart to each and every one of them.
Yeah, because that's what they did. They followed like when Planet of the Apes comes out. That's when they make Commandy.
Yeah, that was DC not being able to land the Planet of the Apes license. Just gave it to Kirby. Said, "What can you give us?"
And so with animals that talk, and the one human kid.
And for me, like that was a large part of like my formative like imagination years, because like you'd always have things like Abbott and Costello meet like Dracula or Frankenstein on TV. You'd have like Universal Monsters where it's like Lon Chaney doing stuff.
Oh yeah, like
Christopher Lee fighting every vampire under the sun,
or being every vampire under the sun,
young
depending on the movie.
Heterosexual kid, and you see those Hammer horror movies, you're like, those chicks are hot. They are hot.
Well,
this is the show to discuss that. Yeah.
So like you kind of like are like you're kind of like you're paying a little bit more attention to the Hammer films because of Ingrid Pitt. Like that's
see, and that's the funny thing. Like for me, going through you mentioned it, the Universal horror monster movies from the 30s and from the 40s. That's stuff that you got on TV, and it's not like you had a lot of choice. So you were flipping through channels, but I mean that stuff is classic. And of course, for me, I was looking more at Lon Chaney Jr. during his transformation scene as a little man.
You saw it. I'm not.
Oh yeah, he did. He did a good job there.
I mean, Christopher Lee, young Christopher Lee, he's got it going on.
He's got those eyebrows. It's all about the eyebrows.
So we got a question from the audience. I want to throw this in there because it's perfect timing.
Oh yeah,
Dave Abersole, who we just talked to, what was it last week? I've lost complete track. 2 weeks.
2 weeks ago. Yeah.
He is asking what Tom's favorite Frankenstein movie is.
Ooh. I mean that's tough because there's a lot of like interest. Like they're all different. Like everybody's take is different on Frankenstein. Honestly, I think for me it's the Christopher Lee Hammer horror Frankenstein film, because it's such a it's not a Frankenstein you've seen everywhere else. I mean, it's like that or it's Herman Munster. Like for me, it's one of those two. Because I watched the crap out of the Munsters. Like I've watched that a million times. But the Christopher Lee is so different because it's not the square head with the bolts and like any of that. Like it's a very different stylized take.
Yeah.
I mean, I love them all for what they are. Like I can watch the Frankenstein and Van Helsing and enjoy that for what it is, or I can watch an anime or manga take on Frankenstein and be like, yeah, that's cool. Like it's a different, world of it. Plus, I will say this, like, you should read at least one time Mary Shelley's actual, like, Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus, because all the movies don't do that version. They do their own version where the monster is the bad guy. Unless it's like Abbott and Costello. Like, Frankenstein always fights Dracula. Like, that's a weird thing that they just do. Like, that's like Godzilla versus King Kong. Like, it's a fun mashup to do. But, like, in the book, the monster's, like, the protagonist. Like, you care more and empathize and sympathize with him than you do anybody else in the book. And in the movies, he's always just the monster. Like I love Young Frankenstein, and that's hilarious because it plays on all the tropes. Like Putting on the Ritz alone is worth watching that movie, just for that,
100%. That it's interesting, and Foot Fist Frankenstein, which is going to be so hard for me to say, but
Fin Fang Foom, I'm telling you.
Which I still mess up Fin Fang Foom just because my tongue doesn't work that way. But one of the great things that you mentioned while you were talking about Foot Fist Frankenstein was that it's that part of the Frankenstein story, and even Mary Shelley had left that open.
Yeah.
After where that whole part of Frankenstein's story that's kind of like behind between the lines, behind on unwritten pages, is him looking for the doc, like going off into the Arctic and all the stuff. Like what he did in between in between that time is huge. It's rife for interpretation and for figuring out some other kind of direction for him and some other kind of story, and just it makes a lot of sense to have him go off and try to find how to be either more human, how to find peace, how to do all these things that he wasn't able to do, that he wasn't allowed to do because.
Well, I mean, my interpretation, with the monster was, he's a kid whose dad doesn't like him, right?
Yeah.
Like Dr. Frankenstein makes life. He wants to create a son and usurp, the power of creation through science. And he makes a flawed being, something he's very disappointed in. But like the monster, it's not his fault. Like he's just there. He's trying his best. He's like, you didn't make I just came out this way. There's nothing else I can do. Like, why don't you love me?
Yeah.
And then sort of as the monster gets into the world, obviously he's an outsider. He's visibly different and visibly, flawed, right? He stands out instantly. And, an outsider basically people don't accept. So that leads to a lot of conflict. But it's not his fault. He's like, look, I am just the way my creator made me. And it's and of course that leads him conflict with Dr. Frankenstein because he's like, Dad, I can't be what you want me to be. No matter what you want, I can never be that because you made me wrong. Like, this is your fault, right?
Yeah.
Not my fault, your fault. And so when I was crafting the story, I did take that philosophical approach to the way I, have him interact in the world. Like, like he wanders the earth. He winds up in this like Shaolin temple, and they take him in because they're a sanctuary. They're a refuge, and they take in everybody else. And he learns their sort of philosophy as well as their sort of physical disciplines that go hand in hand with their philosophy, which is just like, 36 Chambers or even Bruce Lee movies. Like when you're studying, you have, or like Star Wars. Like when Yoda teaches Luke, he's like, I can't teach you. You're a jerk. Like, you got to calm down. And
you're a whiny little bitch, please.
Yeah, like
exactly.
No, like the scene where like they're trying to pick up the X-wing and like Luke can't do it, and then Yoda just goes like, huh, and then like just does it, and Luke's amazed and is like, I can't believe it, and Yoda just turns to him and is like, well, that's why you failed.
Yeah.
Like you have a problem. It's in your mind. It's not in like what the structure. So those were elements that I brought into the story to try to make it more compelling, as well as to get a reader to empathize. Like, you want people to see themselves in your character, and nobody really sees themselves as like a 6-foot tall monster that's sewn together by other bodies, but they can understand maybe being an outsider or not immediately accepted, or maybe just even if they're accepted, they may say, like, man, like, the world is hard. I just want a place I can go and just be like okay and accepted and be fine. And then the conflict comes in when I have a warlord show up and he upends all that because, he's a jerk. Like, he's the bad guy. Like, that's what he does. And then much like John Wick, Frankenstein is like, well, I'm gonna have to kick this guy's ass because he screwed me up. Like I'm angry with him, and I
was on the path to enlightenment. Damn it!
Right, like I had achieved Zen. I'm centered and all this stuff, and then it totally disrupts your world, and it puts you on this path of vengeance, right? Mm-hmm. Because I mean, Frankenstein, like he's killed. Like I work off the premise in my story that it's after Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so he's already dealt and killed Dr. Frankenstein, his creator. He's dealt with that. And he just wants to be left alone. He doesn't want to do that again. But then when he's pushed up against to action, he's like, well, I gotta go do this. I gotta do what's right by my code of ethics and logic. And again, like, this is a comic book villain. So he's horrible. He's a horrible person. Like, you want him to get like his comeuppance. Like that's the whole thing,
Yeah.
But I did fuse like the Saturday matinees of like Kung Fu theater or those old monster movies where you sympathize with the hero. Mm-hmm. And you have the bad guy who's a very bad guy. Like you boo him in the movies. You're like, I don't like you, boo, And that allows me to tell a very simple, like basic story structure, but then I can draw like awesome kung fu action and fight scenes, and it's a big monster, so you can do all these cool things that like, because I always would look at like Hulk comics or Superman comics and be like, yeah, they're cool, but like the Hulk doesn't know how to fight. The Hulk just kind of shows up and just lumbers in and like does 2 punches to the Abomination and that's it, right? But Batman throws nerve strikes and flips, and when he fights with Ra's Ghul, it's like a 3-page, like triple-page spread of an incredible fight scene. And I was like, well, what if the Hulk knew how to fight like Bruce Lee? Like that level of like moving and fighting and sticking and doing stuff. Because you get because again, like that opens me up to have him fight like really big opponents and threats, but still a lot of style and flair, right? So that's what I fused into Foot Fist Frankenstein. I fused into that story because like I love to draw that stuff. It's like things like I like drawing monsters, I like drawing action scenes, and then I formed a cohesive story around it as an excuse to draw the stuff I like to do.
Which is awesome. I'm going to pass it over to, maybe he's on this side. I'm going to pass it over to Bryan here because
we still haven't worked that out.
Yeah. Like, which way am I going?
It's like a weird down here. Hollywood Squares where I got to go like Jim J. Bullock for the block.
So
Paul Lynde in the center square.
Oh, Paul. We were just talking about Paul Lynde the other day with Drag Race and Vendela Crane.
Dapple.
Oh. So I wanted to talk to you about your art because we've talked a lot about your story influences, but I think you've already name-checked one of your, I would guess, biggest influences, Frank Miller.
Yeah.
So much of what I've seen of your work, especially in this the previews you have for this book, like remind me of Frank Miller, Dark Knight Returns, Sin City, like just very stark contrast. With the martial arts though coming in, other than Frank Miller, which we talked about, do you draw from certain? It looks like some of your influences like manga based. Like who are your manga and other influences?
So. When you do comics and you do martial arts, it's inevitable that you have to look at manga. One of my favorite manga titles that I like to read is this book here. It's called Blade of the Immortal. It's a samurai manga. I also like the manga adaptations of the anime Samurai Champloo, because that's like a hip hop samurai sort of mashup, which is really kind of super fun. But in comic book world, some of my most direct influences come from people like Walt Simonson, Mike Mignola, Jack Kirby, Frank Miller. Then a little bit more on the designy sense is people like Jim Steranko, P. Craig Russell, Steve Ditko. some influences are just in the way they visually lay out and pace their stories, and others are more directly stylistically more apparent in my work.
Some of your more painterly kind of looking stuff reminded me of Fraser Irving a bit.
Well, I mean, it's a curse of that. Like, I am the worst type of artist because I am the classically trained school artist, right? So I went to school. I got an undergraduate degree in graphic design, and I worked for 2 years doing that. Then, because that wasn't the most creative job, and I was still very young, I was like 24, I decided to go to SCAD and study comic book art, and that's where I received my master's degree. So, and again, my parents were older too, right? So the philosophy was, you're probably going to work for like an ad agency, Tom, and that job is going to require you to do whatever comes across your desk. So maybe I have to do an ad for an airline company, or maybe I have to do an ad for Hawaiian Punch, or maybe I have to do an ad for, Vampire the Kindred or something, right? So I'd have to be fairly fluent and be able to switch styles, right? If you watch the show Mad Men, you see the guy in the art department, Sal. And that's his skill set. He's pliable. He's like, I can paint, I can draw, I can do a commercial, I can direct, like whatever you need, I'm the guy. So that was the philosophy that was instilled in me at that time. Because again, like in the early 80s, the idea of doing a creator-owned book was like the idea of, I'm going to build a rocket ship myself and fly it to Mars. Like almost nobody could do it and make a living, even an indie living at it. You have Wendy Pinney, you have Sergio Aragonis, you have the Ninja Turtles guys, like Dave Sim, and maybe Jim Starlin or somebody, right? Like that was about it. Like it was a very, very tight handful of people who could do it, right? And so me, I was like, well, I just want to draw like X-Men. It's the 80s, X-Men's the hottest book, you're reading it, and you're like, yeah, that's what I would like to do. It's only now, in about the year 2000, with the advent of the internet and crowdfunding and crowdsourcing places like Kickstarter, that you can realistically go out, raise money for your project, get backers, and then put it out yourself without going into massive debt, right? Like you can look up like how much it cost Eastman and Laird to do the Ninja Turtles crappy, and I mean crappy black and white books. And I guarantee you, if they had Kickstarter now, the production values on those books would be like 100-fold. They would be so much better. It'd be the same stories, but they would look so much more polished. It's like in the 80s and you had a garage demo tape. When you handed that to somebody, they really were listening through all the noise and crap to hear what your band really was doing. Nowadays, you can have a whole studio at your house, upload to YouTube or Spotify or whatever, and build an audience that way and sound super professional from the production values. And that's what like a Kickstarter and Indiegogo allow you to do now, which is great. It's super awesome. So like my art influences, I take all that stuff that those guys did, I synthesize it like bits and pieces. Like I take parts of manga that are cool visual elements, and I fuse that with like Frank Miller and then like Mike Mignola and then like Simonson. And that's kind of the comic book art I have now. Like if you go onto my DeviantArt site, www.com, tomkellyart.deviantart, you can look at my comic book pages. And like in the early 90s, I had a very Dave McKean style. I love the mixed media, very Photoshop, photo collage style, which by the way was like cutting edge then. Like nobody really knew what Photoshop was. And through graphic design, I had learned like Photoshop 2.0, and I was like fluent in it. So I was like, I know how to do this stuff. That's cool. And so you can look at that and be like, oh, that's neat and interesting. And, you know, back then it was like unheard of. It was like finding a unicorn in the forest. Now, though, you know, I've reined myself in and focused much more on the storytelling and the stylization in my comics to clearly tell a visual story that makes sense, that looks cool. So like, yeah, like when I take bits of Kirby and bits of Walt Simonson and bits of Miller and bits of Mignola and fuse them together, I come up with something that's really much more me. Because I mean, like, I love guys like Art Adams and Gary Gianni and George Perez. I cannot draw like them. Like, I can do a very passable copy or facsimile, but when I start doing like endless cross-hatching, I over-render. I go too far, and you can tell that it's like a bad cover band doing, you know, their version of the Beatles. Whereas, like, just let them do their own song, and you can hear their influences and be like, no, but that's them. Like, they're doing good. So that's how I, you know, fuse my style together.
So given your skill set and all the different influences and everything, what's your process now? What is your go-to for putting a page together from start to finish?
My process is for myself, like on this project and when I do my own art, the process is I work very sort of Marvel method. I come up with a plot and a very loose story. Then I start doing thumbnails and sketches and layouts, and it's all still very, very fluid. And that's sort of a Bruce Lee philosophy that I've integrated into my art. Because like Bruce's fighting style was, you know, he liked to say it was the style of no style. He was like, whatever you need to do at that moment to win the fight, that's what you do. You don't have to do the prescribed steps. Like, oh, they throw a kick, you got to throw a block this way, and then you got to counter with this, whatever. And he was like, no. Do whatever works to win the fight. From an art standpoint, that's what I do. So I keep so I don't lock myself into a tight script. I come up with like I said, an outline and a plot. Then I start like laying it out, like thumbnailing it and doing sketches. And then the story starts evolving that way. As I'm doing that, I start thinking of dialogue in my head and story beats, and I start changing bits. I start moving pages around and panels around and making them bigger because everything's fluid until it like gels together at the very end.
Are you doing that digitally, or where? In terms of your process, though, where are your tools?
I'm like I said, I was born in '72, so I'm a little bit old school. So I do a lot of it analog. Let me see. Okay, here it is. So these are my sketchbooks. This is number 67. So, and that's just from when I started doing them. I fill these up at about every 4 months. I fill up a sketchbook, and when I start laying out a book or doing a story, this one's better. As you can see, I'll throw it to the ground because that's what I do. This one is way more beaten up. Like you can see, I've taped it on the sides. It's like, you know, doing its thing. When I start working in that, it's a complete workbook. So you can see just like insane scribbling and notes and story notes and breakdowns. And then also I have, you know, various different sketches and different stages of work or abandonment and, you know, process, you know, refinement. And I you know, break those down. Like here's like a really crappy like layout of stuff. And so I do that as my initial phases. Then once it's at, let's say, 50%, I have like the characters sketched out. I know what the characters look like. I know how the basic story is flowing, I'll take my thumbnails, which I will work in those books. In fact, let me pull this out here. Yeah. I have like a template, that I've made up that's roughly the dimensions of a comic book. And I'll lay that down, and that's how I will do out my page roughs. And from there, once I get, like I said, 50% of the story down, like I know the story beats, the camera actions, the moves, and all that stuff, I will then scan that into the computer. I will work it up on the computer to about 80%. Then I will print those 80% off, and I will finish it analog, and then I'll scan that back up, and then the last 2% is then digital again. Like that's the coloring and lettering and things like that. So that's my art process in a sort of basic nutshell, which sounds very involved, and I blame the fact that I grew up in 1980 where there was no computers and you just draw everything analog.
Oh, yes.
I'm really in awe of people like Mike Norton who can draw just like straight on his Cintiq. And for me, unfortunately, I'm so used to the tactile feel of the pencil and the paper and the ink that I still need that. Although it is good because when I do like comic book conventions, I can do a sketch for someone and I'm very comfortable in the analog world of doing that. Some digital people, like they don't, like their process is in such a manner that the computer allows you to make a lot of mistakes and undo them. Where when you're in analog land, you just got to roll. Like if someone bumps your table and like you screw up a line, you got to make that line work for you now. Like suddenly you're like, oh, this character's in the rain because there's a bunch of crap that I have to cover up, And so it's been it's very valuable. Also, working analog has a good advantage too, because you can have original art pages. When people go to Foot Fist Frankenstein on Kickstarter in the comic book section, a lot of the rewards, like the upper tier, like mid to upper tier rewards, you start getting into sketches, commission art, and original art pages. That here's the cover. This is all pen and ink, that I did out. And that is an advantage because it gives you another sort of supplementary way to you're working smarter, not harder, because I've already done the work. So now I can get paid for it twice. People buy the book and then they can buy the original art. I mean, that's part of the reason why Jack Kirby wanted to get his original art back. Not only because so he could sell it, but because like Marvel was using it for in-house ads and he wasn't getting paid for that. And he's like, man, if you're selling a whole utility belt and you're using my drawing, that's a job I could have gotten paid to do. I could have gotten hired to do. But you're just repurposing my old art. So for me, my style is a hybrid of both. It's both analog and digital. And it works effectively for me. It's kind of like if you're the world's best hunt and peck typer, you're still faster than a lot of just typists because you've got your system down so efficiently that you can just make it work.
Sure, no, that makes sense. Bill?
When I see you at conventions, every time I pick up one of your Hello Kitty on cardboard. So I know there's a great backstory about how that came about. So why don't you tell us about that?
Okay, so for everybody who just lost their mind of like what Billy is talking about, he's like, I'm talking about these. These are Hello Kitty superhero characters. Let's see who else I got in the bin. Mostly a lot of Batmans. Okay, here's Ahsoka Tano. So, why do I do those, and how did I get into doing that, right? Because it's a very weird thing, and it's like, how does that happen? So, in about, I want to say 2000, I was working at the Wizard World Chicago show. And when you're a very new, young indie artist, nobody really wants to get artwork for you. Like, that's just how it is. Like, you don't have commissions, you don't have a commission list. You're almost begging people, like, you're like, I can draw Batman, I swear to God, you know. And the artist sitting next to me had his 5-year-old child with him, this 5-year-old girl. And she was being a real, you know, she was not having fun at a comic book show like most 5-year-olds just don't have, especially when they're at the artist alley table, right? So I wasn't doing anything, and I turned and I said, hey, you know, I'll draw you something. Like, because I was like, I'll help you out, man. I'll draw something for you. And I was like, what would you like me to draw? I'll draw anything for you, anything. I got nothing going on, right? And she's like, can you draw Hello Kitty for me? Because that was the only thing she wanted. She loved Hello Kitty. And I was like, sure, I don't care. Her dad was like, no, it's a comic book or something. So we said, they settled on the consensus of doing a Hello Kitty Batgirl. So I go, all right, cool. So I got out, a piece of Bristol, and I started drawing Hello Kitty Batgirl. As I was working on it, people kept coming up to the table going like, hey, can I buy that? And I was like, well, it's for her, but like I can make one for you. Yeah, no problem, right? So in about 10 minutes, I filled my list for the day. That had never, ever happened. My commission list had never filled up like that. I mean, granted, it was only like, $6 a pop. I was like, whatever, right? But I was like, holy crap, I just filled my list. Like, amazing, right? So I started doing that. And then I quickly came to the realization that if I did the popular characters in advance, the more I had, the faster they would sell. And that would be more effective to me, because then when people would want me to do a commission, it would be a more obscure character. Like if someone wanted Hong Kong Phooey, I could do it, but I know that's like 1% of the people. Or Patsy Walker Hellcat, or I've had like K-pop bands, I've had Japanese rock stars like people wanted. I mean, really, like every character under the sun, somebody's asked for me at the show. But the majority is like if you have Ninja Turtles, Deadpool, Harley Quinn, Batgirl, Wonder Woman.
Yep, I have my Wonder Woman.
Yeah, like Boba Fett and a few of those. Like if you have those made in advance, you're like, oh yeah, they're in that bin. They're right there. Just dig through and you can grab them. And more often than not, people will just like dig through and they're like, oh, I like this one too. Who is that character? I'm like, oh, that's Moon Knight, or that's Midnighter, or whoever. And they buy them. And look, real talk, that is awesome, because that means I just funded my table from making Hello Kitties, right? And especially being pre-made, like, I'll do like 1 or 2 a night over the course of, like a couple of months before a convention. It's not heavy work. It's usually winding down or winding up to warm me up before I actually do real drawing work. And also, the nice thing too is like, they're super family friendly. Like when I first started doing shows, like tabling at shows, it was still bad girl art. It was still like Wonder Woman spanking Batgirl. Like that's what you would see, or like Lady Death fighting it out with Panthera or something, right? Which, don't get me wrong, the people who were drawing that were doing amazingly really good jobs, but it was definitely aimed at a demographic of 16-year-old guys, right?
We're 57.
Well, I mean, we're always 16 in our mind, Billy. We're always 16 up here, right? And so as time started to change, like when I first started doing the Hello Kitties, I was really the first one doing like cute stuff at shows. Like it was like me and Katie Cook. That was about it, right? And we were doing these bite-sized little, smaller pieces where someone who wanted to go to the show could buy something that was affordable. Like a lot of times you'd look at people and it was mostly they're just doing sketches. And you're like, oh, this is a $60 sketch. This is an $80 sketch, which is cool. They do good work, don't get me wrong. But as Hollywood and conventions started going mainstream, more and more people started showing up, and you start doing the math in your head where like, I don't need one person to give me $1 million. I need 1 million people to give me $1, and that's way better. Like, that's way better economically, right? So I sort of accidentally backed into making the Hello Kitties, but man, like, they've been my saving grace, because like there's tons of times I would go to a show and I'd be like, I don't know if people want to buy my artwork. Because again, like, I would show my artwork to editors and art directors, and, you know, if you're not Jim Lee or you're not like the flavor of the week, they're really like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know. Whatever. I don't know. You know, which is fine. Like, they're betting on a horse that'll win. Like, they want people to fill the seats. It's kind of like if you're an indie band and you're going to like the Metro or the Hollywood Bowl or something, you're like, you better have 1 trillion fans to show up and buy your tickets, because if not, we're not putting you on stage. But when I would go to the shows, people would like the art that they would see from me, but they would really like these bite-sized Hello Kitties that they could take home that were like super cute and non-threatening and like kitsch fun. And then they, of course, when they found out I could make custom ones, they're like, oh, can you make me a Grimjack? Can you make me an Aztec? Can you make me a Judge Dredd? And I'm like, sure. You know, can you make me like Raven Spawn? I'm like, sure.
A Grimjack Hello Kitty? That is very niche right there.
I made a Grimjack for Patrick Bauer from Challenges.
Wow.
The second year I was doing Wizard World Chicago, he came back and he got a Grimjack for me, and Dal, his partner at Challengers, got an Aztec.
Wow.
So when I say I've done almost every character, I literally am telling you I have done just about every character. You know?
And I think to apply testimony to that, the last 2 that I got from you were Zoya and Liberty Bell from Glow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I have people I've done, like Patrick, right? He's a big Doctor Who fan. I've done every Doctor and every Master for him. He's also a big Captain America fan, so I've done every iteration of Captain America's costume for him. Werewolf cap, yep, got that one done. You know, armor cap, yep, got that one done. Oh, U.S. agent, yep, blah, 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 yep, blah, 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 yep, you know. So, like I said, like, that aspect of working at shows and having a cute, family-friendly, bite-sized, affordable piece of art on the table has served me so well over the years. And it's also taught me that people like what they like. When editors and art directors try to forecast or tell you, like, this is how you have to be, they're just playing the odds. They're playing the very cheap, easy odds. And that's because there's a lot of money on the line. If they take a chance with you and you don't pan out, you're costing them money. It's not like, okay, we're giving you a shot at Aqualad, and, you know, if you fail at Aqualad and it doesn't sell, well, nobody cares. No, they care. They give you Aqualad wanting you go to like from 0 to 200. Because then if you do that, then they're like, well, if we put you on Batman, you're going to sell 3,000 times that. So, you know, I learned that. Also, a really cool thing that I learned by working shows, because like I said, I started doing shows as like at a table in 2000, like 20 some years ago, that fans like stuff. They like cool looking art. They don't have a barrier to it. Like, oh, this isn't Batman. This isn't Superman. This isn't, you know, whatever it is. They like what they like. If they walk past your table and they see a print or a piece of art that catches their eye, they will stop. They will talk to you about it. And they usually like 70 to 80% will buy it. But they have to buy what they know. Right? So when you go to shows, you would see a lot of fan art. You would see characters people know, whether it's Star Wars, anime, manga, or Marvel or DC, right? Like, you rarely might see like a Deadly Class print, only from the creator of Deadly Class, right? Because that's their IP, and they get like directly 100% of the money from that, and it's great promotional, moving for them. But when you've really made it as a creator, when other people are selling versions of your character, like you can go to a show and see Hellboy by other people other than Mike Mignola. Like The Walking Dead was infamous for that. Like you would go to shows for years and you would see everything was branded Walking Dead. Like people, I mean, I love artists, but one of the pitfalls, if you are a very photorealistic artist, is that you're using the same reference photos that everyone can Google. So that Rick Grimes or that Daryl or that Michonne that you're drawing is just the same Google image that comes up that everybody Googles. So yeah, you're really, really good at rendering a photo, but you're not moving it around. And that's a pitfall. And you see that at shows. You can see somebody and you see headshots and very specific poses, and that's cool. But like, how about Michonne driving a Jeep, slicing a zombie with her katana as she's like going over a hill? Some of those guys can't do that. They just can't. Like, because they're just heavily photo ref. And I mean, look, I'm not a portraiture artist. I can do it, and I use a lot of photo ref. When you say, like, Tom, can you draw Herman Munster and Grandpa playing checkers? I'm like, yeah, I can draw that. But I know to get those likenesses, I have to heavily, like, go out and find 1 million shots of Grandpa and Herman to draw their faces correctly. I've worked on licensed properties. I've worked on Star Wars properties. I've worked on other like TV show properties for different small publishers, indie publishers, and sketch card companies, where it's like you have to stay on model. Like if you draw Mark Hamill, you got to draw Mark Hamill. If you draw Fox Mulder, you're drawing David Duchovny as Fox Mulder. So you really have to, or Buffy, like you draw the characters from Buffy, you have to get their likenesses right, because chances are the company paid for those likenesses and they're like, hey, that's cool that you have a style, but this is what's moving to their fan base. Mm-hmm. And you accept that. Like when you're like, okay, that's cool, I'll do that. I accept that, We're
a little bit over the hour mark, so let me throw it back over to Steve. Steve, do you have anything else for Tom?
No, I think we covered a lot. And one of the things that that's always good is kind of like digging into some of the other aspects of the writer, the artist, or the creator, just kind of to hear what makes them tick and what kind of things they love and what kind of things they love to do, and a lot of things that they've learned over the years. So I think we got a lot of that, which is awesome. So thank you so much, Tom.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and Bryan, how about you? Do you have anything else for Tom?
No, I mean, Tom, you're fantastic. I'm sure I've met you at a convention, but I think you're certainly going to be one of those stops that every time I see you, I'm going to be like, oh my God, talk to me, man. Tell me what's good, because you got a lot of oars out there and a lot of things that you're passionate about, and I loved it.
Well, I mean, thank you. I definitely appreciate it. Let me just add to the conversation that this book is a long time coming. Like I write in in the Kickstarter explanation that it's really, like I said, like it's a synthesis of the stuff that I was really into from early on as a kid, that once the concept got a hold of me, I really couldn't let go of, and I sort of like, this is going to be the book that I'm going to do, that I'm going to kickstart, because you have a lot of ideas as an artist and a creator, but they don't always fully pan out. This one always just kept sticking to me. Like I started the initial work of it in 2015, and when it's an indie project, your own indie project, it always gets put on the back burner. Like, so you're always putting it down and going to other projects you have. In addition to that, like 2015, my mother passed away. So I had to not only deal with like the emotional fallout of that crap, but then like the logistics of dealing with the house and the furniture and all that stuff, which means, and that's in Pennsylvania. I live in Chicago. So you're splitting time. You're getting very little done. 2016, 2017, I had surgery on, each of my hips, each year. And so that's like 3 to 4 months of downtime where I can't do anything. I'm just like lying on my back. So, it's a long time coming. And I do want to let everybody know who's listening to this is like, all the artwork for this book is done. This is not a Kickstarter where I'm asking for money and then saying, I'm going to go away for a year and then come back to you. Like, it's penciled, it's inked, it's colored. I hired Marshall Dillon to letter it. I paid him. It's lettered. All the files are at the printer. So once this campaign is funded, I just tell the printer, like, push the button, like, just press go and, like, start the presses, and there we go. And that was very important to me because I didn't want to be one of those people who's like, hey, please support me, and then I just disappear and fall off the face of the earth. And I also know, like, life has a way of distracting you. So for me, I always knew it was smarter to front load all the work I had to do and not talk about this. Like, I'm definitely someone who's like, I'll talk about it when it's ready to come out, when it's ready to be talked about. But when it's in production, I'm like, no, I'm just working on stuff. People would ask me at shows, like, are you doing your own thing? Like, I had a friend here in Chicago, and he'd always ask me, he's like, Tom, like, I know you do a lot of, work for corporate clients or whatever. Like, have you ever thought about doing your own comic? I'm like, yep, I have. I'm working on it now. And he's like, tell me about it. I'm like, nope, it's like, it's not ready to be talked about. Like, it's like, I'm working on it. And like, and part of that too is this thing, which is a weird hang up with me, but I kind of firmly believe it, is that as soon as you talk about like a project or an idea that you have, the act of talking about it wills it into existence. Yep. Somewhere else, 10,000 miles away from you, somebody else somehow in the ether hears what you said and comes up with something very similar. And so, I could have talked about like, hey guys, I'm working on this like super cool project and told you all about it in 2015. But also by the time 2016 rolls around, you'd be like, Tom, you say that all the time, but we haven't seen jack crap from this. And I don't think you're ever going to do it. I mean, the New Mutants movie. Let's talk about that for 5 seconds. Like,
it exists, right?
That may come out one day.
One day.
I'll watch it. I'll probably enjoy it, even if it's horrible. But it's like, if they never told you it was coming, then you'd be like, hey, it came out. It's coming out next week. Awesome. But as things keep pushing back, you're just like, oh, Jesus. And I never wanted that with my Kickstarter campaign. So when people go to Foot Fist Frankenstein on Kickstarter.com in the comic book section, I spell it out for you. Not only do I tell you, like, the work is done and it's ready to go. I got a printer. They're in Canada. Like I've talked to them. They've got the files. Like, we're like really like right there. But I've also like created tiers and rewards for everybody to try to give you the most bang for your buck. Like, the digital rewards, just the $10 digital reward is a Kickstarter exclusive. You're not just getting a digital version of the book. You're getting an alternate cover. The digital version doesn't have splash pages in it, or double pages spread, I should say. It has splash pages. Because when you look at a double page spread on like your iPad or your Kindle, it doesn't look good. It shrinks. It's harder to read. I don't like that. Or you have to turn your device. I don't want that. So I specifically made a digital version that doesn't have that problem. Then I added bonus material. I have like 20 pinups, bonus art by a ton of awesome artists. Some pros, some indie people. Then you get like character designs. You get like 7 more pages of character designs about how I made my process. Then you get a digital version of the script. So you can literally see my insane writing and how I changed that into an actual coherent drawn story that makes sense, right? And I bundled all that together so that like even people who are like, look, I live in Tunisia. I'd love to support your book, Tom, but I can't afford the shipping to Tunisia because that's maybe like 5 times whatever you've been. I'm like, $10, you get an awesome exclusive version that like when I put this up on Comixology or sell it on just my own digital sites, you're getting the basic book. You're getting 120 pages of story. It's still super cool, but I've loaded that Kickstarter with the perks, like all these cool things, so that like if you back it, you're getting a ton of cool stuff. Because I know I have backed a bunch of Kickstarters, and some of them have taken like 3 years to fulfill. I hate that. I don't want to be that guy, so I've worked hard not to be that guy.
All right, well, that's great. Oh, sorry, man. I was just going to say that that's great that you've laid that out, and especially thank you before we asked you of laying out what the specific perks were in regards to the campaign. In terms of other contact points on the internet, where people go to get the Tom Kelly experience?
Okay, well, you can get the Tom Kelly experience. You can go to my website, which is my DeviantArt site, which is www.tomkellyart.deviantart.com. .deviantart.com, so it's www.tomkellyart.deviantart.com. You can go on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram at tomkellyart at Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter, tomkellyart at Twitter. You can follow me on Facebook under my name, Tom Kelly. I'm in Chicago. You do a basic search there of Tom Kelly's in Chicago, and I come up. Those are the main sites where you can follow me on social network. I post the most regularly artwork to Instagram and my main DeviantArt webpage. I interact with people on Facebook, but if you definitely want to see my art and really be the most kept up to date, is either Instagram or my DeviantArt page.
Awesome. Well, I am looking right now at the campaign, and it looks like you are... Well, where are we at here? You're over 3,300 of the 4,000 goal. I'm completely confident that you will reach that plateau that you need to.
Oh, it's a battle. I mean, I'm going to sprint through the tape. I'm going to keep going. And cool thing is, like, there's awesome stretch goals, right? Like, if people scroll down to the absolute bottom, basically the deal I've made with those stretch goals is I've added cool, like, drawing art perks to each stretch goal level. So when you look at it, you can say like, oh, I backed this book at this level. What happens if he goes over the stretch goal? It's like, oh, I get more.
Yeah.
Everybody gets more. Like every tier builds from the next, right? And I structured that so everyone gets a maximum bang for the buck. Because like the best thing I can give and the most affordable thing I can give people is my artistic skill and time and effort. So that's what I put on the block, right?
All right, and I really thank you for making it abundantly clear that the project is basically finished, because I'm looking at the 3 people that are normally on this call, and I can say with certainty that we've all had that wait period where they didn't deliver. Yeah,
we've all been burned, right?
Yeah,
we've all been burned by that person who never fulfilled. And I mean,
or it's also the worst. The worst scenario is when somebody like a major picks up the project and then that delays it another 15 months.
Oh, right.
Sometimes you don't want that to happen. Yeah.
I mean, hey, look, I love if a major publisher picked up the book. That'd be awesome. But like, everybody's getting the book. Like fulfillment is the main thing, because that's the deal I'm making with all of you guys, with everybody listening and everybody watching. I want to make this book. I want to make it a reality. Like I said, it's been a lifetime in my making. I'm really proud of the work I put in on it, and I worked very hard to give everybody a super professional and good quality book. And I also know that also means that like I have to get it to you and make sure it gets there to you. And do that in a timely fashion. I've been burned by people on Kickstarter. I've never gotten rewards. And I'm like, it makes me angry. Like, I don't like it. And I'm like, look, I want to support that person. But when you give someone money in good faith and they say, I'm promising you this reward, they should come through. If they don't do that, you're just like, well, you lied to me. Not only that, you're a hypocrite because you said this was important to you. Like, this was your deal. And then they don't come through. And I'm like, no, you just said what you needed to say to get my $5. And I hate you for that.
Yeah, well, it's good to know we won't have that situation with you. We'll definitely put up the link
to your house and I'll give you that book in your hand. I don't care if you live in Kathmandu. I will climb that mountain and be like, "Here's your book, sir. There you go."
All right, man. You are more than welcome to stick around. We have a second segment where we just talk about a current book or current-ish book that we're digging.
Sure.
All right, man. So we'll just keep you around for that. And again, when we do have the show notes and the other contact points, everybody will have the links that you need to access the, as I on the cuff described the Tom Kelly experience. Steve, I know you're usually chomping at the bit for the news bits. I know we've had some developments like the Stargirl renewal and the recasting of Batwoman. We'll just take care of that next week. So I'm going to go right to you, Steve. Tell us about a book that you're digging.
Well, I'm actually talking about Kickstarter projects that actually did come to fruition, that had been a long time coming. A couple of years ago, Hamish Steele, who is a British animation and animation artist. I can't think of the word right now. Yes, an animator. Yes, and also comic artist. Put together the collection for his webcomic DeadEndia, and just this past week found out that DeadEndia has been picked up for. I found out. He probably knew for quite some time because they've been doing the casting for a bit as a Netflix show. So. We're looking forward to DeadEndia being made into an animated series for Netflix with some great voice actors. I know Coco Peru's on there, of all people. Like, it's just a great list. And if you want to go check that out, I'm sure it's all over the interwebs now. But I went back and I actually read DeadEndia in the collected edition, and I have yet to read the follow-up, which is the Broken Halo. But this is excellent. It's just so much fun. The quick description of it is two humans and their dog friend and their demon friends work at an amusement park, specifically at the Dead End House, which is the center of the park. It's just a tour haunted house. That just so happens to also be the portal to hell. And not just the portal to hell, but the portal to heaven too. It is the confluence of all the different planes of existence, where demons and angels somehow or sometimes just kind of slip out. And the characters in this are wonderful. You have Norma, who's kind of like a no-nonsense, also has a little bit of social anxiety, and is really hilarious. You also have Barney, who is a trans man, but also, hard on his sleeve, and he's just constantly, getting into messes, but he means well. And then, of course, Barney's dog, Pugsley, who in the first issue gets possessed by a demon who's escaped. And after they exorcise the demon, he ends up with, one, the ability to talk, and two, very strong magic powers. So just a fun group of characters. And of course the rest of the team, there's Courtney, who's the demon friend that helps them out with a lot of the the issues with demons that are coming through. But it's a great story. Every issue they're encountering a different kind of demon or angel or character that's coming through. There's a mysterious figure from 10,000 years in the future that seems to be sending back warriors from time, throughout time to attack our heroes. And in the meantime, too, Barney's got to work on one of his crushes with the other, with Logs, who works at the Log Flume Ride, and a very cute side plot that happens. But it's a great book, wonderful characters, fun to read. And if you're a big fan of like Adventure Time or Steven Universe, you're going to love this book. Can't wait for the cartoon series. So DeadEndia by Hamish Steele. You can get both collections on No Brow. I think they're actually a British publisher of all things, but you can get it in the US at fine comic stores everywhere.
All right. Bryan, how about you? What are you reading?
So I've been not reading a lot of comics. I kind of get up to speed a little bit late in the week when the new books come out, and the schedule right now is kind of all over the place. So there's not a lot of new stuff. So we're kind of mining the old stuff. But this week, X-Force number 10 came out from Marvel, and I just needed my mutant fix. I needed to know what's going on in Krakoa and see what the amazing Hickman whatever. But X-Force is not Hickman, right? X-Force is Benjamin Percy, and I don't know a lot of his stuff. It seems like a pretty good writer. I enjoyed a lot of the characterizations of Domino, Wolverine. But what are they called? Quentin now, Kid something.
Oh, Kid
Omega,
right? Or Kid Omega or something like that.
Kid Omega, yeah, whatever. Quentin Quire. Which, side note, before I move on, let me just say I did finally go back and read the Green Lantern special, the 80 years, 70 years. What was it? 80?
80.
80. Yeah, it's 80.
How do they not have Grant Morrison have a story in that collection?
That was a little bit of a shocking absence.
I mean, he's the current writer of Green Lantern, and unless he was just too busy, which is very possible,
Yeah.
I was like, anyway. So,
It may have been that they didn't have him in there because he's the current writer of Green Lantern.
It was like a very odd omission. But anyway, be that as it may, the reason I thought of that, of course, is he created Quentin Quire, I believe, or at least he made him famous.
No, he did.
I think he created him. Okay, good. Just double check. But yeah, so X-Force is the sort of Black Ops, off the books. Don't tell anyone we're being bad. Mutant strike force, as it's always been since Cable back in the day. But I think very famously in the last, probably the last best iteration was the Remender era of X-Force, Uncanny X-Force. So it's interesting because there's this whole proclamation in Krakoa, which is the island nation that mutants now live in. Don't kill humans. Like don't. And yet X-Force in this issue and kind of it's revealed from the last issue on, like inadvertently Hank McCoy has killed a lot of humans. And he's done this by trying to sort of hack this techno-floral, it's like kind of a techno-organic-y but flower-based sort of this culture, this South American nation. And they send the Strike Force in as sort of their Hank is admitting to this, they're talking about this or documenting it in one of those text pieces, but then Jean Grey comes in and kind of shakes the truth out of him psychically. And yeah, he pretty much admits to this whole thing, and then they have to go clean up their mess, which is basically this entire nation has just become possessed and infected with this thing. And of course, Quentin Quire is sitting there with flowers coming out of his mouth, and Wolverine's kind of strapped down, being very like, being taken over. So a lot of shit happens. And of course now because of Krakoa, we have this thing where mutants can get completely slaughtered and then brought back. So the playfulness with Quentin Quire specifically and his death, and then of course he will be reborn as back to normal. It's fun. It's interesting, but overall, I don't know. It's not catching me. I'm a little kind of lost in everything, and part of it's because of the schedule, and there's a lot going on. But what is particularly interesting and kind of noteworthy, I don't know, because it's a soap opera, of course. X-Men's a soap opera we all love. There's a scene at the end in this sort of hot tub, sort of natural, they call it the broken baths or something like that. I guess it's where the mutants go to chill when they're broken. And yeah, Jean and Wolvie are having a little, Logan are having a little beer.
Oh, wait, is that where the scene where they talk about Colossus's size?
Yep.
Okay, all right, I get you. I saw that today, and I was like, where the hell is this from?
Size?
So there's
Yeah,
that too.
apparently Colossus is Colossus all over.
Oh.
So there's a lot of stuff in the last couple pages of this book where you're like, oh. All right.
So now it's canon, I guess. So.
It all matters, right?
It all happened, and it all matters.
I loved that. I think that playing with that dynamic with Wolverine, and I think his comment to Jean, because Jean's kind of like, I really can't lead this X-Force. It's not in my nature, blah, 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 which, fair. I mean, I think Jean's been kind of wasted in this series. And I haven't loved her arc at all.
No.
When they brought her back famously
What
after
arc?
being dead. Well, yeah, exactly. It's a flat line.
Yeah.
But when they brought her back, only what has it been, 2 years ago? It seems like it's been like a decade, but whatever. That's just life these days. When they brought her back, it was pretty big to bring her back. And then they did a little bit with her with X-Men Red, and that was kind of interesting and whatever. And then this whole Hickman reset, and it's kind of just, she's Jean. She's powerful, whatever. But bringing her back with Wolverine in this sort of sexy, playful thing, it feeds back to the whole, are they a throuple? Because there's the Summers house, on the House of Summer. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
They're on the moon.
Cyclops and Jean Grey all live on the moon together in the same habitat.
Yeah,
And
there's
they
like
share-
scenes in the middle.
Which is interesting, yeah.
As one does.
It's so fun, but also I'm so lost in a lot of it that I really need Hickman to like grab hold of the narrative threads here and really start to like, and maybe that's this whole, what is it, Ten of Swords coming up?
Sword.
Yeah, and also if you look at the solicits, there's only I think X Factor is the only other X book that's solicited that month.
Yeah, that's just kind of a victim of the production cycle.
The catch up, the COVID catch up. Okay.
So hopefully all that rights itself and we're back in and the story starts to gel a bit more. But I was struggling for a little bit to hang on until that stuff. And then I didn't even talk about Tom Cassidy's weird trip through all this, like this ineffectual, sort of self-referential thing that was Tom Cassidy trying to like right his wrongs and reset his narrative and all this stuff. And it was like, I don't remember Tom Cassidy being this self-aware and self-referential. Like, it's cool. I'm okay with it, but it's also a little like, what? Speaking of which, by the way, did Banshee ever come back to life in Krakoa?
Yeah. He's actually in, I think, the one crowd scene where it's the party on Krakoa.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Dazzler's there, and
You have Banshee and his daughter.
yeah, they both
there.
do their Sonic Blast to Dazzler, and she turns into a light show. And
Oh
That's
right,
cool.
yeah. In
I
the
just-
whole like, he is my brother. That
yeah,
yeah.
I miss,
there they're just
That's my Storm imitation.
for some reason, I miss him, and then seeing Tom Cassidy, obviously the relation. I
Yeah.
feel like Banshee needs to come back and do something fun now that he's back. Anyway,
Well, because he was.
X Force. It's fine. It's fine. I wouldn't recommend this book if you're not a dyed-in-the-wool X-Men, X-Force person.
Mhm.
You get lost really easy and I'm an X-Force from way back, or X-Men, but I'm even like, what's going, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which, of course, we were supposed to like stop all that
Right.
with
Streamline.
the Dawn of
and-
X, but
Yeah.
it's X-Men. It's inevitable. Something's going to happen and be weird.
I just didn't think it would happen so quickly.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
kind of hoping that it would last a couple of years, where it was
That
very
there would be like a
cohesive.
real, and I think this is more editorial than anything else.
Could be.
Because there's, we've had interviews with people who are in editorial in the X world, and they weren't sure if certain characters were mutants or not in interviews. So Hickman can only do so much because there is the commercial interest to have all these ancillary books that who's ever in charge of driving that train, they got to know their stuff inside out. And
Yeah.
I knew that this weekend the DCBS box was coming, so that meant head first into the DC universe. So my first instinct was to finish Letter 44. Look at all these books. I didn't want to do that. So I went to the bookshelf instead of the comic racks, and I picked up Jonathan Case's The New Deal, which I've actually had for 5 years and haven't read it. This came from a recommendation from Matt Broussard.
Yay, Matt.
Some time ago, and the main project that I knew Jonathan Case from was the Green River Killer graphic novel. This is a book that he actually wrote and drew. There's a few others that are in the mix out there. The New Deal literally is a reference to FDR's post-depression economic program. It takes place in 1936, and it takes place at the time that, and this is in real life, that Orson Welles directed an all-black production of Hamlet up in Harlem. So that's the backdrop of where New York City is at the time. And the principal characters who you don't see in the front, this is Nina Booth, who's this mysterious woman who comes into the Waldorf Astoria where Frank and Teresa work. Frank is a bellhop. Teresa is a maid. Teresa also has a role in the Orson Welles directed Hamlet. And there are a series of robberies at the hotel, and nobody is exactly who you think they are from the outset. And as the storyline progresses in a way that's really interesting, because there's not a lot of biographical information in regards to the lead characters, in regards to Frank and Teresa, about, we know Frank has an uncle, but in terms of getting the characters' voices, it was really, really well crafted without just bombarding us with biography. You really knew what these two characters were like very quickly. He has that, and I can totally see why Brossard liked this book, because it's not a huge puddle jump from his stuff. And since it is a book that takes place in 1936, we have a lot of commentary in here about economic disparity and class, and specifically with the Hamlet and the role of Teresa as a black maid in a traditionally white establishment. We naturally touch on racial politics. And it's also a very quick read, which I liked. I think it's only about 102 pages. It's only ever been issued in hardcover, and it was issued by Dark Horse again in 2015. And that's the book that I decided to talk about this week. I have some reservations in terms of particular plot points in the story. I hate when there is a sense of propulsion and then there's this ancillary stuff that just gets in the way. And unfortunately, this book was had two instances through that. But that being said, I also do regret that it took me 5 years to read it. So, book I want to talk about from Dark Horse, Jonathan Case's The New Deal.
Cool.
Yeah.
It looks beautiful. I mean,
yeah, no, and it's a really, and I think because it is the pages are thick, you're never going to get the the effect from here. But as I said, it's only 105 pages of story, but it's a quick read, but it's also a very full read. Mm-hmm. And as I said, it's a nice package. And when we actually do have conventions again, Steve, this might be one that you go for.
Cool.
Could be.
Yeah. Tom, is there anything that you're reading currently you're digging?
I got two things real quick. The first thing, it just came out maybe last week. It's Kirkman Somni's Firepower.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
That's a really, it's a kung fu martial arts sort of theme book, so of course it's up my alley. But it's real. It's Chris Somni art. It's Robert Kirkman writing. It's really good. That the first book that comes out, it's a trade, and it's like $9. You can get it free on the Hoopla app, the library app Hoopla, Hoopla.
Oh, cool.
You just read it free, like right now, as long as you have a valid library card with your local library system. So it's go check it out. It's really cool. It's a super fun story. And then the second one that I wanted to talk about real quick is called The Old Guard. That's coming to Netflix. It's basically it's like what if Highlander was part of a Black Ops military team? You have these immortal characters that essentially can't be killed. They can get shot and blown up and beaten up, but they won't die. They'll heal, they'll regenerate, and they'll come back. And then it's sort of a take on what their existence is. Like, since most of them have lived since before the Crusades, their best skills that make them the most employable are as soldiers of fortune. So that's what they do. But they have a moral code, and so they only take on jobs that they deem are valid and, of course, pay well. It's coming to Netflix. Charlize Theron is the lead in it. I think it's dropping on Netflix maybe next week. That's also on Hoopla, so you can go and read that first volume, the first trade, for free. The artwork's very Eduardo Rizzo-esque. Mm-hmm. So if you're down with someone like Eduardo, you can check it out. It's super cool to look at. and it's a really good story. So I really enjoyed reading that, and then I was extra excited when I found out they were doing something with it on like Netflix, because it's definitely something that benefits more from a series, something that's like bingeable over a series of time rather than just a theatrical movie, because it's a complex story that you have to sort of unpack and explore. But both of those are super cool books, and like I said, like if you just download that library app Hoopla, you can read them for free if you have a valid library card. Get them right on your device. I mean, they're also sold in stores and through DCBS. So if you do want the physical books, you can easily get those too. But if you don't want to wait and you have the option, go download them like right now. They're super cool. They both look amazing. Like Firepower's Chris Samnee's art, it's beautiful to look at. Like I said, Old Guard, it's like if you love any Eduardo Rizzo book, the guy who's doing it is very much in that vein. He's not Eduardo. He's not trying to be like copy Eduardo, but he's from that sort of same school and style. Both of the stories are really well written and really awesome. So, go check them out. I guarantee you guys will really enjoy them.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap this episode up. And when we do wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears podcast up, we do so with this segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment. In the bear community, if you find a fella attractive, you woof. Makes no sense because bears don't woof, but we've accepted it as part of the culture. And when we talk about a woof of the week, it doesn't necessarily have to be a comic book. It can be a film or a television program or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener or viewer, may be interested in sampling. I'll start as usual with Steve. Steve, what's your woof of the week?
Well, my woof of the week is actually another Netflix show, or actually a comic series that went to Netflix. Are you going to be talking about the same one?
No, I thought your woof was going to be, and I just love saying this, mucho, mucho amor.
If I had a second one, definitely. But I'm going to give people time to watch it. Mucho, mucho amor. Watch it. I'll talk about it next week. But this week, Warrior Nun was based originally on a comic series by Simon Barry.
Oh, yeah.
Warrior Nun Ariella. And that series sort of followed Sister Shannon and her fight and her crusade against demons as the chosen warrior. Ariella, was the chosen warrior with superpowers, basically super angelic powers. When Netflix translated it to the small screen, what they did was they created sort of a new story as a sequel. So if you've read the comic book up till now, obviously there's some other plot points that are different. You're not, Warrior Nun, the series is completely different. It actually moves the chosen one role to a new girl who is not a warrior nun to start. She's just a poor, unfortunately dead girl who ends up getting the halo, which gives her the powers of the warrior nun, the angelic powers from the warrior nun. And the order that has been secretly fighting all these demons and keeping the world safe all this time has to bring her into their order and train her up, even though they really don't like her. The actress, I do have to say really quickly that the actress who plays Ava, the main character, Alba Baptista, is fantastic. She's actually a Portuguese actress, but it's kind of hard to tell because her accent is almost non-existent. It takes place in Spain, so you have some beautiful vistas. Some other great actors and characters there, of course. Toya Turner does an amazing job as Sister Mary or Shotgun Mary. But it's a great series. I highly recommend it. All 10 episodes of the first season are on Netflix now to stream.
Awesome. Brian, how about you? What's your woof of the week?
I was actually going to talk about mucho, mucho more.
Talk about it.
Talk about it.
I will, and it's all because of you, Bill. I think you posted that you were watching it, and I was like, oh my God, it's out. I want to watch it. I had just finished Politician Season 2 last night, and I was like, let's watch this. We'll knock this out. It's not going to be bad. Hour and a half, easy. But if you're not familiar, for some reason you didn't hear about this, I'm amazed. It's all about the Puerto Rican psychic legend Walter Mercado, who I remember watching when I was younger in the 90s and I think even late 80s, and would pass by Telemundo on the typical channel surfing that we did back then. And I would be fascinated because there's this very gender fluid, Liberace looking character with fabulous hair and capes and outfits that are sparkly and stoned to the gods and just amazingly drag, even if we didn't know it at the time. And, he never would say that. Anyway, this documentary was filmed mainly in the last few years of his life, and features some very heartwarming moments with him looking back on his life and with his family and his assistant, Willie, who I'll just let you just watch that and experience that whole thing. But I learned a lot. Obviously didn't know much more about him than he was a psychic. Had no appreciation for the fact that so many Puerto Rican communities, but all over the world, just adore this man, this being. And I also really enjoyed his thoughts on religion. He's psychic, but he also draws on Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, a lot of different faiths to inform his worldview.
And legitimately really was taking the best parts of all of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and he had a very mature look at the end of his life and sort of his legacy. I think it doesn't shy away from some of the things that were issues for him, both personally and with his business or the business that he was part of. So overall, it's a good, fascinating look at this person. And again, so many people who have no idea who he is. You want to go on this journey and just learn about this amazing Puerto Rican god of sorts, mystic, let's say. But the tarot element also, if you're a big fan of the tarot and astrology, they do a great job with the graphics to make this whole connection to the tarot. So highly recommend it. It's an hour and a half on Netflix. Go watch it. Let us know what you think.
And one thing I do want to mention real quick is that if you're worried that they make fun of Walter Mercado or that it's going to be kind of detrimental or dwell on the controversial aspects of him, this was one of the most respectful documentaries I think I've ever watched, where they truly, the filmmakers truly loved the subject and let him, and the people around him talk for themselves. They didn't play up the drama. They didn't make it as it could have been, kind of making fun of him. I mean, they could have, but they didn't. I love that.
I thought that was really inventive how they addressed the imitations of him that were prevalent in the Hispanic and Latino communities.
Yeah.
In this documentary form, he was somebody I wanted to see protected.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was due to the positivity that the documentary focused on. So, all right, great. Tom, do you want to throw Wolf out? Do you have something you might want to throw out there?
I got two quick hits. The first one, it's up on YouTube actually, so you guys can watch it. If you get a chance and you want to listen to some fun music, go listen to Charlie Benante from Anthrax. He's the drummer from Anthrax. He's got some guitar players together with Reverend Run, and they do a Run DMC mashup, like a medley. It's super fun. It kicks ass, and it's really entertaining. It's a quick song that you can do in 2 minutes, and you're just grooving the whole time. The other one is, if you get a chance, I highly recommend it. It's a Bruce Lee documentary called Be Water.
Yes.
It's, ESPN 30.
Be water, my friend. Yeah.
And obviously it's close to my heart. And the whole Be Water metaphor was Bruce's philosophy of, his daily philosophy and then his fight philosophy. And I touched a little bit earlier on it, but it's a great documentary. You find out tons of fun stuff about the man, the entertainer, and the martial artist Bruce, and all that he did. And it's a ESPN 30 for 30 documentary. So if you've ever watched any of those, they always do a great job with the production values and the story and the narrative that they generate. So, check both of those out. Like, obviously, the YouTube Run DMC Anthrax matchup is super fun. And, with the Bruce Lee documentary, you see why they call him a legend. Like, you really do. Like, he's amazing. So.
Right. And like you said, with 30 for 30, it was also nice to have a documentary that did focus a little more on the athleticism. There's an excellent documentary with the Enter the Dragon home video release. Excellent. But I think because of the specific channel that this was being broadcast on, there was a little bit more of his athleticism. And I was really happy to see that. Again, the 30 for 30s, you don't have to be a sports fan to dig those.
No,
they're amazing. They're amazing stories. It was a little painful to watch the Lance Armstrong one because I think these are very good vehicles for people to rehabilitate their reputations.
Well, the funny thing about Lance Armstrong, if you watch the Greg LeMond one, it's called Chasing the Badger.
Yeah.
That one's all about Greg LeMond, and he specifically has things to say about Lance that are negative.
Yeah.
So he paints a view of like, I was the first American to go to this race, the Tour de France. Everybody hated me. They did not want me to win. So I was fighting, I'm biking up a mountain, a literal mountain that's hard as hell. But then I have to fight essentially the whole system of cycling and French cycling to win.
Yeah.
And he's critical of Lance in an honest way because he kind of knew what was going on.
Yeah.
So that one is more balanced. And I would recommend that if you really do like competitive cycling. Again, like they do a great job talking about the athleticism and the whole training aspect mentally and physically, what you have to do and what you overcome. And they're greatly, the way they're all created is so anybody who doesn't know anything about the sport can come up to speed and watch it and get sucked into the narrative. Mm-hmm. But I would recommend that. It's called Chasing the Badger. It's on, I think it's on Netflix. It's with ESPN 30 for 30. It's really good. It's really good.
I would be here all night with the recommendations, but just in terms of what I had put forth about the reputation rehabilitation, after the Brian Bosworth 30 for 30, I will never look at him the same way again. This is somebody who really understands the mistakes that he made at critical points in his career. And that was a riveting 2 hours. So I guess I have two recommendations now. The other thing, oh my God, like the hosts are on Netflix. I have to say that before I lived with somebody, and at points when I was living by myself, I don't know why I would do this, but I always would go to sleep with the Lifetime reruns of Unsolved Mysteries on. So
yes.
His voice is soothing. How dare you?
Yeah,
it is.
So I think I've actually heard more Unsolved Mysteries than I've actually watched. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because Netflix has rebooted the series in this time with Sean. Oh God, what's his name? Is it Levy? Yeah, Sean Levy, who's the principal producer of Stranger Things. They take a little more liberties with the format. There's no narrator. They're much more long form than the segments would be on the TV series, but it does hit on that scare the shit out of you by calmly telling you what happened way that the original series did. It's only 6 episodes, covers a range between disappearances and murder, and a particularly well done UFO episode of sightings that took place in Pennsylvania in 1969. You go through it very quickly because after you're on one, you want to go to the next one. So that would be my woof of the week, the rebooted Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix. All right, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I wish we weren't in this COVID-influenced atmosphere because I was really looking forward to seeing you at some shows. Yeah. But hopefully we can reboot that in 2021.
Yeah, it'll be a whole new year that'll be 100% better.
Yeah, it's gotta be. Yeah. All right. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to listen to us, you can do so through iTunes. Subscribe to us there. And if you're digging it, please leave a review. You can also catch us through Stitcher Radio and some of the other podcatching platforms, which we have to get a list of because there were some I didn't even know about.
There's a lot now. There's a lot.
Yeah. But there's some we're on. I had no idea because of the Libsyn feed. And if you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Billy Z.
I'm Brian Pittard.
I'm Steve Morey.
You're
And
gonna
I'm
hear a
Zach
woof.
Webb. Woo.
All right. You're gonna hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back next week. Take care, everyone.
Wolf.